Thank you, David.
First of all, let me tell you this about the noise. The only noise that matters to this franchise and this team is the noise inside this building and this room.
Inside the 10, double coverage, and he come down with that football. He did. Brandon Cooks. Ingram, left side, touchdown. This side, end zone, touchdown Johnson. Breaks a tackle, throwing on the run, and overthrew it and intercepted. Picked off by Justin Reed, and throwing and intercepted again. At the 25-yard line, that's Hargreaves. Hargreaves to the 10. Pocket, moves out, going for it all downfield. It is caught inside the 10-yard line by Brandon Cooks. Taylor to throw, coming over the middle. The catch is made and the touchdown. Danny Amendola under pressure, got rid of it. Caught. Pharaoh Brown, what a catch down the middle of the field. Ingram giving the ball, touchdown, Philip Lindsay.
And welcome to another episode of the Turn Up For What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles. And the Texans are 1-0. I didn't think we'd be saying that this week necessarily, but joined this week by somebody acutely placed to talk about both teams in the 37-21 win is a man who played for both sides, Mr. Seth Payne. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. It's I'm excited to be on in Britain. I was on with the BBC last year, and it was like the thrill of my grandmother's life. If there's anything with a British accent, she thinks I've made it.
That's it. Yeah, there's a certain sort of connotations there, I suppose. But week one, I suppose it was probably threw up more surprises than it has done in a long time. I saw a tweet this morning that said 8 underdogs won this week, the first time in 35 years, the most underdogs won in their opening game. In your experience, Seth, you've been a lot of teams. Does week one mean a huge amount always?
It doesn't, it doesn't always, obviously. A lot of times there's upsets every year. I think the most notorious one was when I remember the Bills beat the Patriots in the opening week, like just a throttling of over a decade ago. And that didn't end up being consequential in the year. I do think that this year for the Texans, given how much drama there's been surrounding the team, and given that I think a lot of the outside drama, the non-football drama, seeped into people's analysis of how the team was going to be. I think it was probably important, and whether it was important for the fans or the players themselves or the coaches or the organization, I think it was important to just maybe get back and remember, oh yeah, this is ultimately about just playing football at the end of the day. Yeah. And the Texans have a whole bunch of veteran players on their team that know how to play football.
And I suppose my overriding kind of thought was it just felt there was just a little bit sense of loss, I think, isn't there? Because you've obviously got the most talented player you've probably ever had in your franchise history, kind of lurking in the background. More reports and more kind of Schefter kind of tweets out in the game day morning, trying to fill the space and keep pushing that agenda. But it just kind of felt like, when you saw how well that team were coached and what they achieved versus the teams we've had prior, who have had far greater talent but just weren't as coached as well. And it just kind of felt a bit, you just felt we've left a lot out there, haven't we, the last few years?
It does. I guess I'm trying not to think about what might have been, because if you think about the Bill O'Brien era was so much about, I think, trying to out-scheme people, trying to create this beautiful machine of an offense that when you don't execute it properly is exactly the opposite. It ends up feeling herky-jerky. It ends up feeling like almost, I guess staccato would be the word that comes to mind. When I think of like a Bill O'Brien win, even a lot of the convincing ones, they never seemed quite as methodical, as organized, as disciplined as the way the Texans offense looked yesterday. And yeah, it's impossible not to wonder what Deshaun Watson might look like in this offense and exactly how he'd do. I guess in my mind, it's that now that we've been through an entire offseason of this, and now that it looks like the organization's committed to trading Deshaun, I think psychologically I've kind of moved into that territory of, hey, at some point you're probably going to get multiple high draft picks for Deshaun Watson. There's a whole realm of possibilities for what might happen. But if Nick Caserio knows what he's doing, that you can do something with those draft picks, and maybe you find your quarterback of the future. And it's a different era now where you don't necessarily need the the top 5 draft pick guy to pan out to be a competitive team. That's where. So I'm part delusional and partly just kind of psychologically moved on from Deshaun.
And what was your sense? I saw you tweeting out a picture of the voodoo donuts from the press box there. What did you get a feel for the sentiment in the crowd? Because I spoke to somebody on FaceTime during the game or just as it started, and there was a lot of empty seats, I think, wasn't there?
Yeah. And it's hard, with Houston sports, it's hard because all of our stadiums are empty at the beginning, even when the teams are really good. It filled in somewhat. I think the biggest sense I got, because we do a pregame show down in the south end zone there, the Bud Light Plaza before the game. So I get to talk to a lot of listeners and fans before the game. In the preseason game, I met 5 different people who were first-time season ticket holders. So that was interesting. Yeah. That because we know the season ticket holder wait line had been 10, 20,000 strong forever. This year they got down to 0. Their people's numbers came up. Some people took advantage of it to, I guess you'd say they're buying low right now. And then obviously the other people that have had season tickets or were buying single game tickets to this one. I think there are a lot of people that are just flat out diehard fans. They're going to be committed to going to the football game no matter what. And whether you want to call them long suffering or they're in it for the long haul or what have you, that's what you have. And I think the crowd kind of self-selected for those people. It wasn't the kind of crowd that's going to be booing anybody at the first sign of adversity or anything, because I think the expectations are so low. So I guess that becomes a huge question, is just where is the general fan base, the people that chose not to go to the game or have checked out completely. I can't really get a sense for them because they've checked out completely.
Yeah, no, it's funny, isn't it? Because you go from having, thousands of people want to give you money, and you manage to erode that equity with people in such a short space of time. It's, I suppose that Sunday was the first time we'd actually see it manifest itself in real terms, and how many bodies actually showed up.
Well, and the huge irony of all of that is that, I think there was a perception when Bob McNair was the owner that there was a perception amongst fans that the team didn't want to spend really big, that it was more about making money, that it was more about the business side than actually winning championships. I thought that was partially unfair. Just in that the Texans weren't stingy, but they certainly weren't exorbitant spenders. But then last year they spent like crazy, and Cal McNair, and this being the change, Cal McNair has been really willing to spend. Now it's errantly at times, but they've spent a lot of money on the facilities. They spent a lot of money on players last year, and a lot of those were just bad contracts that Bill O'Brien doled out. It's unfortunate from a business standpoint that Cal McNair finally really, really spent money, and if anything, it's the very thing that disenfranchised a lot of fans, and now they're suffering on the business side. I do think that McNair is very open to continuing to be aggressive spending. I think he's going to be different than Bob McNair in a lot of respects. It's just a matter of, okay, is it going to be wise? Is it going to be Nick Caserio, taking it easy and being frugal and careful with the money all the time? It seems like that it will be. The Danny Amendola signing, was Battle Red blog. Matt Weston had said that the difference between Bill O'Brien and Nick Caserio is that Bill O'Brien would have given Danny Amendola like a 3-year, $8 million per year contract. And I think there's some truth in that. Yeah.
I suppose when you sign Randall Cobb, when you're already paying Kenny Stills $8 million to walk out on you halfway through the year, I think it's kind of, it probably kind of sums up that year's cash flow spending for the team. In terms of, I suppose that it's week one, Urban Meyer cut a sorry figure, I think, out there. He didn't look comfortable. I don't even know if he knew who the Texans were prior. To be honest, he seemed like kind of out of water a little bit. But it seemed like a performance that, albeit they took the opportunities they were given, that they turned the ball over 4 times. But you're not going to get that every week, and I suppose that's the consideration we've all got to kind of probably take into next week, particularly. That was a team probably not prepared to play, and we were, I think, and that was a big difference.
They were so unprepared. I was really shocked, and I guess I shouldn't have been, just because no matter how smart a college coach is, there's going to be parts of the NFL that are just different, especially when you've been in the college game your entire career. Clock management is different in college. You know, the 2-minute drill in college is just so much easier. You've got so much more time than you do in the NFL that I guess I shouldn't have been surprised that Urban Meyer burned all his timeouts early on, but that he was also playing with a rookie quarterback. And I think when you get to the substitution errors, all these procedural penalties, it seemed like more penalties were procedural penalties, illegal formations, false starts, all that stuff, than there were actual aggressive during the course of play penalties. I think that the Texans veteran composition showed up there. They're the fourth oldest team in the NFL. They're the oldest offense in the NFL, which shocks a lot of people, as it should. But that's what Caserio did. He went out and he got veteran players. Those are the kinds of guys that can just flat out. It sounds boring to say, but sometimes making fewer mistakes in the game is the key to winning a football game. And they clearly made way fewer mistakes. Like David Culley, I give complete and total credit for entrusting his coordinators to go about their business, and Culley being like a genuine head coach that doesn't have his hands in everybody's cookie jar. He's just he's making sure that everybody's in the right mindset, that the clock management, that the game management, all of those things he can focus on because he's got coordinators that he trusts. So maybe the biggest shock was that, David Culley looked like the better head coach out there. His team was better prepared to play than Urban Meyer's was.
Yeah, I mean, beyond the scenes of the sort of awkward tongue tune that he seems to do as a nervous habit, I think, when he knows he's on the broadcast. But he, I suppose, the big change in Tim Kelly is that, he comes away from Bill O'Brien, who he's probably the only coach. Well, he is the only coach really that he's ever been sitting in behind. And I thought yesterday the offense looked good, multiple tight end sets. There was, a couple of two backs in the backfield regularly. And the red zone packages, the thing that we've been horrendous at for the last few years, were really good. And I suppose, what do you think that boils down to? Just literally the reins coming off Tim Kelly, because it looks, much better and much more creative.
I think that there are a couple things. One, especially in the red zone, it's hard to have a good red zone offense without a good rushing attack. Yeah. And whenever the Texans have had a good rushing attack, it's been more about volume than actually looking like a good rushing offense. And there's a few elements to that. I'll say three things. One, I think Mark Ingram is the dependable, tough, smart player that Bill O'Brien thought he was looking for, but he just didn't seem to be able to identify dependable, tough, and smart players. Like he's a 31-year-old guy. He's going to be 32, he grinds out yardage. So I think and he's got a nose for the hole. He's got a nose for the line of scrimmage. So there's that. The offensive line blocking itself. Let's see. I want to be sure I say this right. The blocking and the coaching is better to the point that they can withstand having one bad block during a run play. Like there were Ingram's first touchdown run. I think it was Max Sharping. Max Sharping had a bad snap on that, but it didn't matter because everything else was good. Yeah. Like you're never going to have the perfect football. If you have the perfect play, then that's when you have a 30-yard run. You're never going to have a perfect play. Guys are going to screw up, but if everybody else is doing exactly the right thing, then a running back like Mark Ingram can score a touchdown. And I think that's where the difference is. If you just kind of step back and watch the offensive line work, watch their footwork in unison, the timing on their combo blocks, all of that, it just looks crisper. And then the third thing in the rushing attack would be, I think Tyrod Taylor, A, can still run the ball, and B, I think he's got if you watch him work in the backfield with his fakes, with his handoffs, with all of that, there's a certain level of competence and a veteran savvy there that goes beyond just his ability to run the ball. I think he just executes the option game, the RPO game, everything else well enough that it makes it that much tougher on the defense. So the threat of Tyrod Taylor as a running quarterback, but also just his ability to deceive in the backfield, the sleight of hand in the backfield, that helps a lot.
Yeah, because I suppose what we've not seen, and it is the same playbook. I don't know if you've noticed huge tendency breakers, but I think that was always the criticism of that offense, was there was just, as you said, they probably tried too hard to get it to work, but there was never any layups. There was never any easy yards. And we actually saw that. And most of it was to the boundary. But, you saw a lot of kind of easy easy yards and keeping them on the field. And I suppose the formula for this offense this season is going to be running the ball and continuously running the ball, but then also, the short to intermediate stuff. So based on the run block improvement, do you think that's sustainable then this season, I suppose? Because we're going to come up a lot better fronts than what Jacksonville brought to town. And I think that'll be the test. But do you think that's just with the bodies they've got up front? And I know they were rotating at right tackle with working Cannon back in, and I thought Gary on Christian was serviceable again. He seems to be a good pickup. Do you think they've got the formula there to that, or do you think is there a potential they come unstuck when they come up against better fronts who can control the line a bit?
Yeah, I guess that's the question: is what are our standards and what are we hoping for? Are they going to go up and are they going to run the ball on a team like the Bucs or the Steelers or something? I don't think this is the year that's going to happen. I think that some of the improvements in execution are very sustainable. The big X factor is still what's Max Sharping going to do? How's Titus Howard how's Charlie Heck going to look when he comes in and starts playing? Like these are the big questions, really. I think they can continue to improve and get better over time. The other big X factor, though, and this comes the question is, okay, how do they do over time? Mark Ingram getting 25 carries a game isn't the formula.
No,
he's never had more than 230 carries in a season. It's one of the reasons he's healthy to the point that he is now, unless I looked up the stats wrong, but I believe 230 is the most carries he's ever had in a season. So at some point they're going to have to start moving towards Phillip Lindsay, David Johnson, and how can those guys do? I flat out like Mark Ingram better as a running back than those guys. For everything the Texans want to do. He's 31 years old. Yeah. So that's not sustainable. But some of these other guys are going to have to show improvement.
Yeah, I think so, because I think Phillips Lindsay is probably underwhelmed, I think, to this stage. You've not quite seen the same kind of, angry runner, I suppose, that they made his name as an undrafted free agent in Colorado. So yeah, I think there's a concern, I think, in terms of can you run the ball, but then I think it was the first run with the absence of actually seeing the all 22, because I don't think it's come out yet or even is available with Game Pass this year. I
don't really. Hey, what is going on with Game Pass?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I'm not paid for it because I'm trying to find out first before I do.
Okay, let me tell you. I'll tell you from my perspective. Okay, yeah. You can't look up unless they're going to update it later today. And so I was giving them a pass during the preseason, but man, you can't look up specific plays within games. The actual just functionality of it is all off, to where you even fast forwarding and rewinding and everything. I to anybody listening, if you're thinking about it, just wait a second until some of these hiccups are cured.
Well, yeah, because I always think on the broadcast you probably see 20-25% of it with the camera angle, and actually you see so much more with that angle. But yeah, it was just that the first run and all five linemen came up, and whether it was the first level or the second level had a block. And I don't think we've been used to seeing that. I was going to screenshot it just because I think the execution has been pretty poor on that side of the ball. But yeah, long may that can continue. 37 points, you'll take it every week, right? It's not been often we've been in that level of efficiency, I don't think, in offense.
Right. That's the best thing I can say about that game is it's easy to discount it, and you should. I mean, it's the first game. You don't want to get ahead of yourself or anything. But at the very least, you made a bad team look bad, which not everybody does. It's not so easy. Even the good teams sometimes struggle to make bad teams look bad. We've seen that with the Astros all year long. Yeah. They have a hard time making bad teams look bad. So I think in comparison to what Bill O'Brien did for so many years, I think a lot of people just found it refreshing to just go out and actually physically dominate and mentally dominate an opponent. And I don't care if they're good, bad, whatever. It's not that easy to do in the NFL. And the Texans are further ahead than I think a lot of people who kind of just casually dismiss them as the worst team in the league. I don't know where they end up. I don't know if they end up being the 25th worst or 25th best team in the league, or maybe a little bit better than that, or what have you. But there's certainly reason to think they can at least compete within football games. If not stack up a whole bunch of wins, they can be competitive.
Yeah, because I think it's a strange composition of a roster. You said it's turned out to be old, I suppose, and the current CBA has effectively eradicated a lot of these guys' roles in the league because it's been built to lean clubs towards the rookie class. So and build that way on cheap talent, especially when you've got a quarterback paid. But I think it's an interesting formula, and we'll see if it works or not. But I suppose the output of it is it delays the rebuild. We're probably in a reset right now because a lot of these guys won't be here and they won't be worth the money you'll need to pay them in 2 or 3 years' time. But one guy we did pick up last year, and Pharaoh Brown, do you think he's the real deal? Because he improved every week last year, and he's probably the first time we've had a guy who's probably a dual threat blocking, and pass blocking and catching.
Right. Yeah. Look, that Mark Ingram touchdown that we're talking about there, he played that H-back or fullback / tight end role or whatever you want to call it, really, really well. I think that I hesitate to lean on the cliches of dependable, tough, smart, competitive, all that stuff. But I think it's clear that Nick Caserio has a type, and it's not like he didn't find Pharaoh Brown, but I think he had to, make the decision to stick with him. I think that those kinds of players, if you look at what the Patriots have been able to do with them, if you find guys that are just eager to do a lot of the things that other people aren't, especially at slot receiver and tight end, you can get a lot done with those guys, and it's very economical. So I think that Pharaoh Brown, by his willingness and eagerness to block, and then to be a bright guy on top of that, has probably found himself a role on the team for at least the next couple of years. But I think you're right. When it comes to what this looks like now, how you might be a more competitive football team right now, it's hard not to think about, but where do you go from here? Like, what do you do with all these guys who are on 1-year contracts, some of whom maybe you pay and extend and keep around, but you're still going to have to replace all those other guys. That's where I suppose a little bit of a leap of faith comes in. If you're just being a fan, if you're trying not to super analyze everything and you're just being a fan, you just got to hope that Nick Caserio is the real deal, and that his plan, which is a little bit like the Patriots did when Belichick first got there. It's a little bit like what Pete Carroll did when he first got to the Seahawks. It's just to an extreme degree where you have so much turnover and you have so many veteran players. You have to have the faith, or you can have the faith, or try to have the faith, that Caserio is going to slowly swap these guys out for some younger players, some top end talent players. But then I think moving forward, it is also, there's probably going to be an element of your team that's always veteran players on 1-year contracts. I think he likes having that built-in hunger, built-in drive that guys have. I don't care who you are, when you're on a 1-year deal, you're a little bit more desperate, you're a little bit more nasty than if you got a nice cushy contract.
Yeah, and I suppose we flip on to the other side of the ball. I suppose I didn't think necessarily when I first watched it the pass rush was there, but the more I watched it back, you could kind of see that there was a sort of level of containment, I think, rather than anything else. I'm sure you tweeted something out like that as well. I remember reading that during the game. So there was the more you kind of saw it. I suppose the concern at that front, and I think that there is some flash. I thought Ross Blacklock flashed a couple of times. He almost got a couple of sacks, caused that incompletion on a third down in the third quarter and stuff like that. So, you saw improvement from those guys. But I suppose that the concern is the run defense, because you're going to have a big test of that in Cleveland next week. So that's really going to see where these guys are. And I don't know how consistently they're going to build, manufacture enough pressure up front. But just before rush, it looks like they need more bodies in there to create that. But what did you think of the front and just the schematics that Lovey tried to call in general?
I think you've got it. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think that versus good quarterbacks and versus good offenses, you could see the holes and the gaps in the defense yesterday that Trevor Lawrence just wasn't able to exploit. And I think that it's going to be a little bit of an uphill climb versus the teams like the Browns. I think that, so I've been trying to look at the defense as, all right, how are they going to be compared to last year? Are they last year they were a bottom 3 defense. When it comes to the pass rush, I think overall, the biggest difference yesterday was that there were so many fewer instances of the quarterback just sitting back there forever with no rush whatsoever. You know, that okay, ideally you want somebody screaming off the edge that's winning a one-on-one and then wins fast, and that's how you stack up a whole bunch of sacks and tackles for losses and all of that. I don't know if they have the guys on that roster to do that, but the overall athletic ability, the overall speed, the overall pass rushing ability, if you look at your top 6 pass rushers, I think is way better than the overall pass rushing ability of last year. We still had a lot of stodgy guys. You had a lot of Brandon Dunn type guys on the field at times. You don't have those guys to put out there anymore. So I think just being able to actually get push up the middle, being able to guys win at times on the edge is going to be better. My big concern from yesterday was that you could see where the holes in his zone defense, like the classic holes in zone, were there. Trevor Lawrence couldn't exploit it, but Baker Mayfield will. So I think you need a jump from week 1 to week 2 where hopefully the guys in the defensive backfield can be a little snappier on recognizing things. The linebackers can be a little snappier in their zones. Maybe Pierre Lewis is better than Grugier Hill. I don't know at this point. But if he's back and healthy, that's where you're going to have to be. I do think that the ability to create turnovers is real. I think just by scheme and by execution and by focus by Lovie Smith, that's where versus teams like the Browns, you're going to have to come up big in that regard. I think they'll have some bad series, multiple bad series versus the Browns. The question is going to be, okay, can you force a couple turnovers? Can Tyrod Taylor continue to protect the ball? Then you got a shot. And we knew that going into this season. That's going to be the formula. If you're going to beat good teams, it's going to have to involve turnovers, like it is for every team in the NFL.
Yeah, and I suppose that they will swing games in your favor. And there was a couple of layups. They didn't actually turn all of those turnovers into sixes, but there's definitely I suppose a concern that that it's almost a statistical anomaly at times, turnovers, because you can get a lot very quickly, and then you can go 3 or 4 games without any. Yeah.
Oh yeah. That's the problem with turnovers, and it's not a problem with turnovers, but you're right about the consistency of it, because I think you can look. It's luck as to whether you recover a fumble. Sometimes it's luck whether who comes down with the tipped ball. Forcing the opportunities, you have some control over that. Pass rush helps a lot, but guys aggressively going after the ball matters too. So at least forcing the fumble, you have some control over. But you're right that in any specific game, it's not like you can go into a game and say like, well, okay, we plan on getting 3 turnovers in this game. You could beat the snot out of a team and not get 3 turnovers. So it works out really well in the regular season. But it was the Bears even before Lovie Smith got to the Bears. It was when Dick Duran was the head coach during one spell. They were really, really good at turnovers. But then you get to the playoffs, and if you got to win 4 games in the playoffs, and if part of your formula is winning the turnover margin, you're just not going to do it 4 times in a row, not to an extreme degree.
And in terms of the linebackers, do you think, and they laboured the hell out of this on the broadcast, but obviously the guys were coming up, filling the double A gaps, then backing off to try and put a bit of pressure on a young guy. And I don't know where that influence came from, if that's always a Lovie Smith thing. But I think when it seemed great at the time, but as you said, that there's the obvious gaps in this zone coverage, and by the time you've got 3 guys who aren't good at pass coverage anyway, by the time they then back out of that, it feels like you're almost kind of baiting them into those short intermediate throws, which I don't think you're going to continue to get away with unless the guys up front can get home a bit quicker. But do you think that's the biggest weakness with this Lovie Smith?
I think if that's what you end up majoring in, and offenses seem to get better and better at that now. Ever since defenses really started just putting everybody up at the line of scrimmage to disguise their looks. There are a couple elements to that. One is just how well do you disguise it? Because everybody's got to tell, and a linebacker, a defensive back, whoever, quarterbacks start to get pretty good at figuring out who's actually blitzing and who's not.
Yeah.
And when everybody's out, sometimes it ends up working against you, not just because of the coverage issues, but because if you've got a lot of guys with a lot of tells, then the quarterbacks know exactly what's coming when you're trying to deceive them. So there's that. I do think that Lovie's probably going to blitz more than a lot of us expect him to. Okay. He didn't have to versus the Jaguars, but you saw, as much as I thought Urban Meyer burned his timeouts earlier, he's lucky he did, because on that one defensive back blitz where there was a timeout right before the snap, I mean, Trevor Lawrence might have lost his kidneys on that play because that was an actual blitz. So I think that versus a quarterback where they get into a situation where they need to blitz, I think he'll be willing to do that a little bit. So that's what I'm looking forward to seeing in the Cleveland game, is how really has this defense changed? I think they stayed pretty vanilla intentionally versus a rookie quarterback. in this week, we might see a little bit more, I don't want to say exotic, necessarily creative, but a little bit more of a diverse defense.
Yeah, and based on Sunday and everything you've seen in training camp, and maybe obviously some of the stuff, the vast majority of stuff in training camp, you'd hope didn't see the field in pre-season. But has your opinion changed on this team in terms of the chances and where you think it'll end up?
It might. I had been saying before the Eric Murray trade, I had been saying that I thought the ceiling was 6, 7, maybe 8 wins. If they had a bunch of turnovers on their side, you could get 7 or 8 wins. That wasn't a
Freudian slip, was it? It was Eric Murray.
What did I say?
Eric Murray, no. Bradley Roby, you mean?
Oh, Bradley Roby. Yeah.
You've not heard someone, have you?
No, I haven't heard anything about Eric Murray. No. Bradley Roby, the Bradley Roby trade. The only thing I worried about with Bradley Roby was, okay, is this the beginning of some kind of a fire sale? Are they going to just start trading everybody away? I think that there was a reason. I just don't. I think that maybe Caserio didn't think that Bradley Roby was the Texans type of guy. Yeah. And, we could have a whole nother discussion about whether or not they should that should be his opinion. But I don't think they're just going to start trading off any starters. So I would probably stick to where I still think their high end is 6 or 7 wins. Yeah. I gave them an over under of 4 wins on the year. I'll revise it if they end up looking really competitive versus the Browns. Then I'll say, okay, I was probably wrong on that, and I'll revise it. But right now, I'm going to stick with 4 wins because I think there are some weaknesses there, and there's some tendencies that they still have to show their hand on. So, but I'm cautiously hoping that I was way off on that.
Yeah, well, I think I suppose that Sunday was a game that you thought they might have a chance to win. The Browns isn't one of those, but we'll see where we end up, and there is another couple of those on the schedule. But Seth, thank you very much for your time today. I know you got a flight to catch, so appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure, man. Next time I'll stay on for an hour. I'm sorry, I gotta beat this damn storm that's bearing down on Houston.
All right, okay, another one. Yeah, never ended. Another one.
It's one of our annual 500-year weather events.
Yeah. So. Well, thanks very much for your time, Seth, and I'll keep in touch, and hopefully let's do it again sometime.
Nice meeting you, bud.
Appreciate it.